Hello, I'm a fashion designer in my mid-40s, working back and forth in the US and abroad. Now, I'm considered to be a successful fashion designer, but when I was young, I paid my dues, just like anyone else. At that time, as a new bride, I ran my own clothing store selling handmade clothes that I designed in a very tiny space that I rented. It was a very rewarding job, and I felt proud of myself, but people around me pitied me as a waste of my talent. From the moment I entered the fashion design department at a prestigious university, I was a promising up-and-coming designer in the fashion industry for almost the entirety of my 20s. This was thanks to winning several grand prizes in international fashion design competitions, recognizing my outstanding talent. During this time, I received numerous offers from foreign companies with high salaries, but I turned them all down to pursue my dream of becoming a fashion designer. The reason was simple and clear. I couldn't leave my parents, who have lived in poverty all their lives and were often ill. While there may have been more opportunities if I went abroad, I couldn't be certain of my success and didn't want my parents to worry about me. I couldn't turn away from my parents, who raised me with integrity, even though they were going through poverty. I used the prize money from the competitions to pay off all of my parents' debts, and with the remaining money, I opened a small clothing store. Knowing my circumstances, those close to me gave me sympathetic looks. My parents were also saddened by our family's impoverished circumstances and wondered if it stood in the way of their only daughter's success. However, I thought the opposite. I was happy enough to be able to live with my parents, and I felt even sadder that I couldn't do more for them. In order to take better care of them, I worked very hard in my store. But a small misfortune befell me, foreshadowing a great disaster to come. It began with the expiration of my rental agreement for the store. At the time, I didn't have enough money to move the store, and I was having a great difficulty finding a new location for my business. That's when my mother-in-law reached out to me. She had heard from my husband that I was struggling to find a new location for my business. I confirmed this and explained that it was difficult to find a small shop without any extra money. She then said that's why I'm bringing it up. Don't misunderstand and listen. I was confused and asked for clarification. There is a vacant shop on the first floor of my building. How about renting it? I didn't know what to say. I am the owner of the building, after all. A landlady. Why are you so worried about me owning a building? These days they say landlords are next to God. My mother-in-law had a space of approximately 350 square feet in a shabby shop on the first floor of her building, and she recommended it to me. But to be honest, I wasn't very happy with her proposal. The shop she suggested had been vacant for several years and was a nuisance for her. It was obvious that she was trying to pass on the trouble to me. Above all, my mother-in-law was sarcastic and hurt a lot of people, including me, from time to time. She was very conceited, bragging about being the owner of her building. Being her daughter-in-law and tenant in her building would mean trouble, because I didn't even need to imagine how badly she would treat me. Thus, I decided to decline her offer indirectly. The first floor of your building. My clothing store? Why? Don't you like it? What young people say these days is that the farther away the in-laws and parents are, the better. Are you like that too? Do you want to keep your workplace away from your in-laws and family? No, it's not like that. But if I enter your building as a tenant, I would have to pay the deposit and monthly rent, which I don't have extra money for. As for the deposit, you can use the same amount from your original store. And for the monthly rent, since you are my mother-in-law and also my family, don't you think you could help me out with that? Are you gonna lower the rent? Don't do that. Renting is your livelihood. Just because I'm your daughter-in-law, I cannot be a nuisance. You have a knack for making people feel hurt once in a while, don't you? It's because I really want to lower the rent for you. I'm serious. How much? How about $10? For monthly rent? What the? Are you joking? Are you trying to make me go bankrupt? I'm not saying that I will charge $10 in rent, but I'm saying that I will reduce the monthly rent by $10 every month. Oh my lord, my mother-in-law acted as if she was giving away several $100,000 worth of real estate for free but in reality she was just reducing the rent by $10 a month. Of course I knew it, but that day I couldn't refuse my mother-in-law's offer. I decided to rent that troublesome store that had been vacant for several years on the first floor of her building and move my clothing store. Why? Because she persuaded me. You know, I have been a native of the neighborhood for generations, right? I know. Did you know that I have many great connections in this community? How could I not know that? You serve many neighborhood associations as their president, and you have several gatherings monthly, don't you? Then this would be quick. If you rent our first floor space, I will do my best to refer people to your store. I mean, I'm gonna drive all the locals to you. It was true. My mother-in-law was a native of the neighborhood for generations and was well known. With the help of my mother-in-law, I thought that running my clothing store would be much easier. So I decided to rent a space in my mother-in-law's building and move my clothing store. But the day that I moved into my mother-in-law's building, her small requests began, like asking me to change the light bulbs at her unit where she lived on the top floor of the building, or asking for a heavy package to be moved. It was not difficult at first. As her daughter-in-law, it was something I could help her with. And since my husband traveled for his job so often, I also took care of things for my mother-in-law who didn't have a husband. However, my mother-in-law's small requests became more and more severe. Starting one day, she took all the clothes that needed mending from the people in the neighborhood and threw them in front of me. It was large enough to be a carload. Even so, she would say the same thing that made me get so flustered. The more I see the women in my neighborhood, the more they are so great. Unlike young people these days, they are very frugal. Are these for mending again? All these clothes? Can't you tell at a glance when you make clothes? Of course it's for mending. If you have time to ask about it, just start fixing them right away. These are the clothes of our association members, and I will need them by tomorrow morning. I made a promise that they would be repaired for sure. It's already past 10 o'clock at night, isn't it? This will be hard to do by tomorrow morning, and still I have to stay up all night. Because you did this once a few days ago, I stayed up all night mending clothes, so I'm still tired even today. Oh, that's your problem. How could a young person like you live in such a harsh world when you have such poor stamina? In my time, I stayed up all night for a week and still went out to a farm, and everyone lived like that. Still nothing happened. Mother, you never farmed. You were a landlady, so you never had a difficult job in your life. Do I have to farm to be able to talk like this? It's a figure of speech. Since you brought it up, I will try to do it. However, I hope this will never happen again. This is a clothing store, not a dry cleaner for mending clothes. Clothes stores, dry cleaners, and sewing chores are all the same. But why try to act so almighty for that? What do you mean? Never mind. I will take it that you'll have them done by tomorrow morning, so I will leave for now. How about the mending charges? You don't want me to do it again for free, do you? This is all about promotion. If you're getting $10 off from your rent, thanks to having a landlady who's your mother-in-law, you should sacrifice your time at least that much. If you have to ask, this is not even a sacrifice. It's the respect that must be shown toward the building owner. Neighborhood business is always done with some sacrifice. Why do you say so harsh every time? And by the way, when did I exploit you for free as a daughter-in-law? I introduced you to a local customer at least once every 2 days. Where else can you find a great mother-in-law like me? How dare you complain? First, it was true that you need to sacrifice when you do business in the neighborhood. Doing business with local people cannot ignore the power of word of mouth. But the problem was making me do all the work for free, while my mother-in-law was getting all the credit for herself. It wasn't advertising my store, but it just spread by word of mouth that my mother-in-law was a good person. Second, it wasn't wrong to say that my mother-in-law brought local people to visit my store every other day. She introduced the locals to my clothing store. It was true that she introduced them from time to time, but she also introduced troublesome customers who didn't help the store at all. Why? When she brought customers to my clothing store, the first word of her phone call was always the same: landlord's discount. A customer is going there right now, but since I introduced her, just charge only half the price for the clothes. I told you before, it's not a seasonal stock of some big company, and if I sell it at half price, I have to close the store. So, are you saying a landlord's discount is burdensome? Of course it is burdensome. I'm not doing business for free, and I'm always in the red. Let's see. Then, if not the landlord's discount, how about a mother-in-law's discount? I beg your pardon? The mother-in-law's discount is 60% off. Got it? Mother receiving only half is already a loss, so how could I give a 60% discount? If you're gonna keep doing this, why don't you give me the amount of the discount? Huh? What? Give me as much as the discount amount? Call. It's getting disconnected. I can't hear well. Should I change my cell phone? Hang up for now. Hello? Mother? Mother? Oh right. Also, the stairs in my building were a bit dirty. Give them a 60% discount as a mother-in-law's discount and clean from the stairs on the first floor to the roof. Like this, my mother-in-law forced a discount of at least 50%, sometimes up to 70%, for each customer she introduced to my clothing store. Each time she didn't miss mentioning the reduced monthly rent. It was reduced by only $10, yet I had to sell my handmade clothes at bargain prices to those introduced by my mother-in-law. I couldn't help but swallow my pride every time. Moreover, the practical difficulties were much more serious. Due to my mother-in-law's forced discounts, the loss I had to bear was over $1,000 a month. The free repairs of the clothes brought by the locals, thanks to my mother-in-law, kept getting worse and worse. I could have easily made $1,000 or $2,000 if I hadn't paid for the repairs, normally. Given the situation, I was struggling both financially and mentally, to the point where I considered running a repair shop. Whether I was struggling or not, my mother-in-law's abuse of power reached its peak and went beyond the limit. Now she was trying to leave all the chores to me, such as cleaning the neighborhood, sorting the garbage, and patrolling for crime prevention. While I struggled with these tasks, my mother-in-law took all the credit for herself. It became unbearable, so I complained to my husband, who had just returned from a long business trip, and asked him to intervene with his mother. But he said there's nothing wrong with what my mom said. What? It's true that the neighborhood business requires a lot of volunteer work and investment in the community. Since my mom gave you the shop for a cheap monthly rent, shouldn't you repay her in kind? Also, to be honest, my in-laws are also my parents, so it's not right to argue about who has lost money in the family. And what about leaving all the chores in the neighborhood to me? Do I have to put up with it just because I rented in your mom's building? Why do you keep complaining? Since my mom is an elder, she can make you do it. As her daughter-in-law, couldn't you just do what she tells you without complaining? Never mind. What more can I say to you? Even if I die soon, you don't think of your wife at all and you're always on your mother's side. He was his mother's son. Even though my husband heard all my stories, he always took his mother's side unconditionally. He repeated exactly the same words his mother said to me. I couldn't say anything more and I became desperate. Before I knew it, I was sorting out the garbage in the neighborhood that my mother-in-law had ordered me to do to appease my anger. The moment I realized that, I felt an unbearable shock followed by an unbearable shame. I was unknowingly conforming to my mother-in-law's abusive behavior that had been going on for so long. It was a shameful feeling. At this rate, it was a shock that I might end up living as my mother-in-law's slave for the rest of my life. I decided that I couldn't continue to live like that. After ordering me to sort the garbage collection in the neighborhood, my mother-in-law and my husband were eating dinner by themselves. I crashed into them and complained, "Why do I have to do all the chores in the neighborhood by myself?" That's because I made a promise to the residents that I will take care of everything. So, did you bring it on yourself? Then you should take care of it. I figured it all out on my own. By making me do everything? Did that solve the problem? Why are you suddenly acting like this? Don't you know that you should be respectful towards your elders? How dare you glare at me like that? This is because I'm also having a hard time. It's because I really can't live like this anymore. So, please don't leave the neighborhood chores to me in the future. Stop forcing me to mend clothes for free and stop forcing me to give discounts. It's okay if you don't introduce any customers to me. Don't complain about what needs to be done anyway. What in the world is so easy? There is no other landlord who doesn't do that for their tenants. Compared to them, I'm a very kind landlady. It's rather difficult to find a landlady like you in the world these days. If you are doing this just because I'm the tenant of your building, I'll leave the store right away. So please stop. Oh my, do you think anything would change if you moved out? What do you mean? Once you move out, the relationship between the landlord and the tenant will come to an end. But don't you know that there is no contract period for marriage? As long as you're my daughter-in-law, I'll treat you the same as now. So be prepared for the rest of your life. Then if I get a divorce, your abuse will end, right? How dare you mention divorce? Why couldn't I dare? Do you have to ask? It's rude to talk back to your mother-in-law when you're merely sewing clothes to make a living. Sewing? Yes, sewing. In other words, if sewing is your job and you're renting my building for business, in the old days, you would be nothing but a slave. Everyone else thinks so too. Who else thinks so? Tell me who. Who would think that? Never mind, there's nothing to argue about. And if you don't want to be kicked out, do well from now on. Like in the old days, before selling you out to another family as a housemaid, you should do what you're told or keep your mouth shut. If you're a slave, you should kowtow like a slave. It's funny. No, who kicks out who? I'm leaving on my own 2 feet. I'm so fed up with this kind of household. I'm gonna move to the store and get a divorce. The moment the word divorce came out of my mouth, my husband, who had been watching silently, cursed at me with severe abusive language that I could not bear to put into writing. He came at me as if to hit me, but I knocked him down with my head. Then I left the house spitting angry words. Keep this straight. Do you think money is everything in the world? Do you think the building you have now will protect you for the rest of your life? No. If you live like that, you will surely disgrace your family someday. I guarantee it with the rest of my life. That's how I liquidated both the clothing store in my mother-in-law's building and my marriage. Then, the clothing store deposit that was not returned by my mother-in-law, the labor costs lost due to my mother-in-law's forced clothes repairs, and the forced discounts, the labor costs of doing chores in the neighborhood, were all reimbursed to me as alimony for divorce. The day the court ordered them to pay me the money as alimony for divorce, my mother-in-law and husband had the sourest expressions. How ugly they looked. Wasn't this an exhilarating divorce? After the divorce, I stayed at my parents' house for a while. I spent days in despair, because the wounds I received from my mother-in-law and my husband were so great. Even though I received a huge amount of alimony, I didn't feel thrilled, and instead, only a feeling of resentment remained. Because my self-esteem hit rock bottom, I even felt skeptical toward the world. Is the world originally like this? Then how should I live from now on? I was full of worries and concerns. The thing that brought me back to life was my family, who felt sorry for me because I had given up a promising career in the fashion business. It was my mom and dad who said, "We are more than grateful for your taking care of us all this time. Now go and find your life. There is no reason for you to be treated like that. You are capable enough." I was able to stand up again after regaining my courage and dreams through my father and mother's warm support. I sent my carefully prepared portfolio to foreign fashion companies. A few years later, just in my early 40s, I came back to JFK Airport wealthy. The portfolio I sent to foreign fashion companies received a very good response, and I was employed with a 6-figure salary and high incentives, working for a foreign company. It was thanks to my hard work. Within a few years as a fashion designer, I had achieved a great deal of success. The reason why I suddenly returned to New York after achieving such success was because the foreign company I worked for had a supply contract with a medium-sized company in New York. Of course, the supply contract was for the clothing I designed myself, so I returned home because I needed to stay in New York. Upon returning home, I was welcomed by my parents and immediately began looking for a place to stay. Meanwhile, My mother mentioned that there was a building for sale at an auction and suggested I take a look. The building happened to be owned by my ex-mother-in-law, who had treated me as a sewing slave. Whenever she spoke, she would boast about being the owner of the building. So, I wondered what had happened, and was surprised to learn that my mother knew the answer. Yes, your ex-mother-in-law seems to have lost all of her fortune. All of it? Why, if she owned at least one building, there shouldn't be any trouble at all, right? It was a big deal, so she blew it. Didn't she like having meetings from the beginning? She was into investment clubs and that sort of thing. That's true. That's why I had a hard time. Then she stepped on shit. She formed a big investment club with her close friends in the neighborhood and was in charge. But one of the members took all of the investment money and skipped town. Not only did she take the money, but she also cheated on your ex-mother-in-law and stole the money she was investing separately by herself. Wow, I knew that person would get into trouble someday. So it's obvious, the people in her neighborhood filed a lawsuit against your ex-mother-in-law to return the money, but she was left alone because the money was stolen by her friend. The amount was worth 7 investment clubs. Her friend took off with so much money, but your ex-mother-in-law had no ability to pay it back, and it wasn't enough that all of her assets were seized by creditors. So the building that she always bragged about went up for auction. If I had known this was happening, I would have returned home as soon as possible. I witnessed live on air as their properties were sold at auction. Did you? Why? Come to think of it, I received all the money I deserved and got divorced. So now we have nothing to do with each other. But why do you know every detail of the family's news? It's kind of weird. Any reason? Because I was curious about how those people could do such a terrible thing to my precious and only daughter. My daughter and I were curious if my ex-husband and his mother would continue to live well, or if they would receive the punishment they deserved. As I listened to my mother's words, I felt a deep pang in my heart. I thought about how upset she must have been for an innocent person like my mom, who wished and watched for the downfall of my wicked in-laws. So I took a bold step and took out some loans to bid for my ex-mother-in-law's building and won the bid. Not only for my personal vengeance, but also to relieve the hurt my own parents harbored because of them. On the day that my parents and I went to see the building we won in the bid, my ex-husband and his mother were trying to deny the reality that they had become penniless. They were blocking the entrance to the building with furniture and sofas, holding a sit-in and saying that it was their building and they could never leave. The neighbors gathered around them and started to curse at them one by one, throwing scornful looks at them. It was clear that all the residents of the neighborhood who had gathered were people who had lost money because of them. It was ironic that my ex-mother-in-law, who used to show off in the neighborhood and pretend to be nice to people, was now standing in front of them as a bitch. In the meantime, my ex-husband and his mother noticed me and seemed glad to find me. They said, "I can't believe it, but it was really you?" The person who won the bid for my building was really my daughter-in-law. I'm so lucky. It's so fortunate. Are you happy? They even suggested that perhaps the person who won the bid for their building was an ex-daughter-in-law, so she could reunite with their son and live happily ever after. I hope you're not thinking that. Are you? Anyway, if you do that, we're grateful. Of course, that should be the right thing to do. After we reunite, you have to return my building first. Why? Because I'm your mother-in-law, and you are my daughter-in-law. So at best, return the building that I won at the auction. Of course, for free. And were you trying to get money from your mother-in-law? How much affection did I give you? That word just made me laugh, so I laughed for a while. What affection? It's the worst trashy thing I have heard so far. Hey lady, we ended things a long time ago, right? Also, you and your son were the worst people that I have ever met. Got that? How could you say such nasty things? How dare you say such nasty words? You don't seem to understand it yet, but you like buildings. Didn't you, as a former building owner, originally say that bragging and using power as a landlord were normal? I'm doing exactly what you used to do right now. I want to give back the same things I received from you to where they came from. It seems you made some money. You were nothing but a slave doing sewing. Did you hit the lottery somewhere? I was my own lottery. You just missed it. What? It's just that I became successful with the sewing ability you were talking about. It's a lie. Call it a lie at once. Why? Are you jealous? Would you like more? Even the salary alone would be in 6 figures. How many more incentives do you think there will be? It's amazing how much money is piled up in my bank account right now. And how much interest will I get from the bank even if I leave it alone? Is this enough to give you a grip on reality? I am the successful owner of your building and a very successful rich woman. You know you blew your fortune away and now you're penniless, losing your building and getting kicked out. Don't you know? The situation has been reversed, you crazy old lady. Then, my ex-mother-in-law and my ex-husband started claiming that this was their building so they couldn't even take one step out. They threw something at me, but it didn't hit me at all. The way they floundered was pitiful. Nevertheless, I called the police, smiling triumphantly at my ex-mother-in-law and my ex-husband. I reported to the police that an outsider set up obstacles on my building in my name and was trespassing without permission. Eventually, they were dragged out by the police. That's how my ex-mother-in-law and my ex-husband were brutally kicked out of their neighborhood, barely escaping lynching by a mob. Like it or not, I didn't even pay attention to them being kicked out. Just like how my ex-husband didn't pay attention to me when I went through all kinds of hardships because of his mother's misdeeds in the past. They treated me as a slave who only sewed for work because they had some money. But in the end, they ended up being runaway slaves who were being chased around because of the money. This is why you shouldn't despise people for not having money. That day, my parents hugged me tightly. It was a hug of deep comfort and deep understanding. Now that I'm in my mid-40s, I'm still working remotely at home as a designer for a foreign fashion company. On one hand, I supply clothes that I design myself to the company in the US. On the other hand, my ex-husband and his mother are living the life that they cursed me with as penniless beggars. They move from place to place with no home to call their own, being chased by their neighbors and relentless creditors. They still have a lot of debt to pay back to their neighbors. I thought this only happened to other people, but this day has come for me too. No matter when it happens, I believe good things will also happen to you. Everyone, take good care of your health. Thank you for listening to my long story. Please cheer for me and share your words of wisdom in the comments section. Liking and subscribing would be a big help to me. Have a wonderful day.